Good evening and welcome to Talk It Out, sponsored by ArabLounge.com. Tonight's show is about Iraq. Tonight's show is about the women of Iraq. Our guest tonight is director of Deep Dish TV, which is a grassroots satellite network that produces many independent documentaries and help raise funds for independent filmmakers about documentaries that reflect realities that we do not see in the mainstream media. He was also previously a producer of live shows for Free Speech TV. Brian Drolet, thank you so much for being a part of Talk It Out.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And we also would like to welcome our audience who are kind of laughing a little bit just because they're going to be on live television. Go ahead, present yourself. Just give me your name, your age, and what you do.
Hi, my name is Jihan Negam, and I am a student at Rutgers University. I'm 20 years old.
Hi, I'm Mohammed. I'm a pre-med major at Jersey City University, and I'm 22 years old.
Yeah, my name is Hisham Fadel. I'm in the limousine business, 28 years old.
All right. Thank you so much, guys, for also being a part of Talk It Out. Brian, tonight we're going to be seeing some clips of the documentary Shocking and Awful. Tell us a little bit about that series.
Shocking and Awful is a 12-part series that we produced in 2004 and 2005, and it's comprised of 12 half-hour programs about the war in Iraq. And as soon as the war began to unfold, we decided that we really should do something. In 1991, Deep Dish TV, together with Paper Tiger Television, which is also a nonprofit production collective, had done a series of 10 programs called the Gulf Crisis Television Project, which covered that first Gulf War. And so we felt that it was our responsibility, really, to try and bring out what was really going on. And so I think it's probably still a series that is the most comprehensive and in-depth explanation of the motivations of the war and what that war looks like from both ends of the gun, you know, from the point of view of the American soldiers who were sent to fight that war, and from the point of view of the Iraqi people, and particularly the civilians who are the victims of that war. And so the program that we're going to talk about tonight is called Standing with the Women of Iraq. And what we tried to focus on was the opinions and the attitudes of many of the women in Iraq. Of course, you can't generalize about everybody, but many of the women, and how women in the United States and in the Western world felt some kind of solidarity with the women of Iraq, and tried to do actions to oppose the war and to bring peace to the country. And it was felt that, you know, our responsibility is to stop this war because it's our country that's waging it, and to be in solidarity with the people of Iraq. So that was the motivation for it.
Where has the series actually aired? Has it gotten any...
Well, the series actually has been seen very broadly. It ran on Free Speech Television. It ran on some public television channels, on some PBS channels. It was selected to be in a number of film festivals, different programs from the series. And the entire 12-program series was included in the Whitney Biennial for 2006. So we were in the Whitney, they gave us a whole wall in the Whitney Museum for 3 months. And there were tens of thousands of people that came by and stopped and watched the videos that we had on video screens there. And it was interesting because we worked with a collective of young artists called Visual Resistance in Brooklyn. And they did the wall for us in the Whitney, and they papered the wall with, first of all, they papered it with stock quotes from the Wall Street Journal, and that over that they put these beautiful cutouts, giant cutouts that they had done of Picasso's Guernica, because we felt that, and that's the cover, I didn't bring it with me right now, but the cover for the DVD set that we did is Picasso's Guernica, because we felt that the destruction that America was bringing to Iraq was very analogous with the destruction that the German Nazis did to this little town in Spain in the 1930s, in the precursor of the Second World War. And it's a very famous painting that Picasso did that's now in a museum in Madrid.
And it's also very interesting that some of the clips that have been highlighted by Shock and Awful, which is the part about Iraqi women, is that a lot of the mainstream media does not necessarily or overlooks the Iraqi women and the price that they're paying through the war, whether it's before the invasion or even after the invasion, because democracy was promised and maybe, democracy has not been delivered, and you see that they have been almost punished even more because they're women by the invasion.
I think that's absolutely true, and over the past several years, since the war began, we've had conversations with many women from Iraq. One of the clips that we'll see tonight is about a tour that 6 Iraqi women made. They were invited by Code Pink, a women's anti-war group here in the United States, and they visited. They had a couple of joint appearances here in New York, and then they spread out and visited 50 cities throughout the United States and spoke with people. And they not only made a plea for American citizens to put an end to this war, but they also were able to tell their own personal stories of what the war had done to them and to their families. And we can talk about some of that later when we show the clip. But, everybody will agree that Iraq under Saddam Hussein was not a very pleasant place. On the other hand, Iraq was a place where women probably had more access to education and more freedom than in a lot of countries in the world, not just in the Middle East. And Iraqi women will tell you that over and over again.
That was mostly prominent even before the Gulf War, and then after that a lot of restrictions were put for women with the new government after the Gulf War. And then now you feel they're even more deprived of so many other rights that they were even saying they had right before the invasion.
Yeah. I mean, it's very complex because Iraq was essentially a secular society before the American invasion. But Saddam would make various alliances with the religious forces to bolster his own position in power. And so restrictions would be put on, maybe they'd be loosened. But now I think that particularly coming from the religious forces, there are a great many restrictions on women.
Under the Sharia
it's not just the religious, it's the ethnic and religious rivalries that I think have been fostered by the United States. And the kind of lawlessness that's been unleashed by the occupation itself. And, so the incidence of rape and the abuse of women in public places has skyrocketed.
The honor killings.
Yeah, and not just, the honor killings, but just the sort of the thuggery and the abuse against women that I'm not even sure it's higher than it is here in the United States. But for what used to be in the country, it's a radical departure since the occupation began.
Yeah, and as we said a little bit ago, even when it was totally secular right before the Gulf War, there's so many other opportunities that had opened for women. Over 250 rural and urban community centers were open. They wanted to foster education. They wanted to train women to get hired for jobs. Equality between men and women was really pushed. And then even with schools for both sons and daughters would go, that you had the literacy rate actually jump to 75%, and then in 2001 it went back down to almost 30% as far as the literacy rate goes for women, because families, especially with the UN sanctions, did not have they could not even provide the money for education for both of their, both sexes of the daughters or sons. So then they would rather send the son to school for that, and so that had a lot of tremendous negative effect on the lives of women and girls.
Yeah, just think about it concretely. That, here you have a fairly, you have an advanced country. It has it's the cradle of human civilization. It's got a 5,000-year history of civilization in that region, the Mesopotamian Valley between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And it's been the victim of many invasions and occupations over the centuries. But I think nothing quite as brutal and as thoroughgoingly destructive as the American invasion and occupation has been. So you can imagine what that's meant for the people, where, you don't know if you're going to be shot when you go out in the street, or by whom. There's many stories that people have heard about Blackwater, the hired goons that guard the American officials in Iraq. There's been many cases of them just opening fire on civilians. Last year they murdered 17 civilians at an intersection because they just, and that was women and children and men, indiscriminate. So people have a great fear of just going out into the street. And of course the occupation has unleashed all kinds of anarchy, and typically occupation armies try to divide and conquer the people through dividing them. So then that kind of division and the fostering of hatreds and between people, and then you have just the kind of thuggery that's unleashed by people that are just out to make a buck, or out to would normally maybe be kept under control, but in this kind of a condition aren't, and women and children are the victims of that.
Yeah.
So, the occupation is a horrible, horrible thing for a society. And I think Americans really need to get a very clear picture of what their country is doing to Iraq and has done.
I wanted to ask some of our audience, Gina, since you're the only girl here, you guys can interrupt if you have a problem with the equality between men and women. Gina, let's say your parents, unfortunately, you're a master's student, right?
Yes.
Told you, sorry, you cannot go to school because we have money to send either you or your brother to go to school. We're going to send your brother because he's a man. How would you feel?
Completely cheated. I mean, I value my education a lot, and I'm a senior this year and starting my master's degree, and I don't even want to finish, so I can't even imagine what it would feel like if my parents had told me, I'm sorry, you can't go to school because your brother needs to go to school instead. So
what would you feel, what would be lost from you?
I would never be able to, that's 4 years of your life that you learn to expand yourself on, and if you don't have those 4 years, 5 years, then you're missing out on a lot. You're missing out on a lot of information that can't be taught in the streets and at home, and that's something that you need to go to school to learn.
Muhammad or Hisham, one of you guys will answer this one. Let's say your parents told you your sister's going to go to school and not you. What would you do?
No, I do have an older sibling, so
Okay.
she's my sister. If that was the situation, I believe I'd find another way. As a male, I think I'd have the opportunity. Maybe I could get a night job or something, and work my way through school.
See, that's the advantage that the men in Iraq even had. If their parents could not put them through school, they could work. But the women of Iraq fear their lives, even leaving their homes to even go get groceries. So a lot of them are pretty much limited to their household. Hisham, you wanted to say something, or?
Yeah, the same thing. The girl actress is not gonna do nothing. So for me, I can go out working and work at night, start in the morning, do something,
Would you, let's say Muhammad, speaking of your sibling, would you go and work for both you and your sister?
If I had to, I would.
Would you want to?
Probably not.
That's great.
But I definitely would, though.
Come on.
It's my sibling, of course. I'd do anything for my sister.
Yeah,
I'm very close to my family. I know she's probably watching this right now getting mad at me, but it's okay.
So just to segue this back into the clip that we're going to see tonight from Shocking and Awful is going to reflect a reality about the somewhat forgotten victims of Iraq, which are the women and the children. Let's see the first clip of that.
وما Shock and awe. Shock and awe.
Shock and awe.
If you have to ask, is this shock and awe, you're not seeing it.
We refuse to carry on business as usual while American soldiers and Iraqi civilians die under the machinery of war.
والله أطلب من النساء الأمريكيات يعني رسالة أوجهها لهم إنه يطالبون أولادهم وإخوانهم اللي هسه موجودين بالعراق إنه يرجعون لبلادهم ويرجعون لديارهم لأنه حتى لا تتشوه الصورة أكثر لأنه بدك تتشوه مع الأسف الشديد.
أشكر الشعب أني اللي هم قسم من عندهم مقوي العراقيين والجيش هم أشكره أني أقول له إنه بسرعة يغادر الوطن إنه خل عنا صدام من الحكم مالته بسرعة يغادرون الوطن يريد يعني إحنا نظام مستقر ويريد الأمن المستقر في الوطن.
إحنا كل زين ندري ما جايين على صدام جايين على النفط بس قد كان يقدرون ياخذون النفط بأسلوب غير الأسلوب اللي دمر البلد.
Women's International League was started in 1915 by women in the spirit of Code Pink who crossed borders, tried to stop World War I, saw the connections between the economic reasons why men went to war and why women had to cross borders. Trying to stop this war, we decided the most subversive thing we could do would be to communicate directly to the women of Iraq. We have a letter that thousands of people around the country have signed, which we are sending to the women of Iraq. As women, mothers, daughters, grandmothers, aunts, and sisters, we are reaching out to you, offering our friendship, support, and strength. You are not alone in the struggle for peace and justice. We pledge to do everything in our power to prevent further suffering for you, your children, and all of the Iraqi people. We call on women everywhere to join in nonviolent action to end the current military operations and stop future attacks.
Diplomacy, yes. War, no. War will not bring anything to this world. Of course, Mr. Kim Jong-il is not my type. Of course, Mr. Saddam Hussein is not my type. But Mr. Bush, you are not my type either.
We may be small, we may be young. We won't stop till peace is done. We may be small, we may be young. We won't stop till peace is done.
What do we want? Peace. What do we want? What do we want? Peace. What do we want? Now.
Many of you may know that women in Iraq lived much better conditions than other women in that area in the Middle East. We were much better off when it came to access to education, access to work, and also in rights, and that had a reason for it. The progressive movement in Iraq has started early on. By 1958, almost 45,000 Iraqi women were organized under what's called Women's League, and they did huge demonstrations on the streets and were able to change some of the civil laws. And most of those included articles of the law that were based on Islamic Sharia. Can you imagine, more than 50 years ago, there was a strong women's movement in Iraq.
The goal of this demonstration is for the fair representation for the women in the transitional government. We want the women to take place in this transition government because we don't want only the man take a place for these places. Why should the woman be in this position? Because she is able to do everything the man can do. We always talk about the democracy. I think democracy is not being established when the woman is not in this place.
أحب كل الناس تقول وياي نعم للنساء نعم للمساواة نعم للنساء نعم للمساواة نعم للنساء نعم للمساواة. Especially politically, women cannot be oppressed anymore. We need to be everywhere. We need to be on all councils, and our numbers are 60%. We are more than half the society. Nobody can keep us down anymore. We want representation. We want councils that have policies that are friendly for women. We want equality between men and women. Long live equality between men and women in Iraq. Long live equality.
That was one of the clips that we saw from Shocking and Awful, a series produced by Deep Dish TV. With us, our guest tonight is the director of Deep Dish TV, Brian Drolet. Brian, we saw a clip of Ms. Yanar Muhammad, who was the person that actually, the president of the Organization of Women's Freedom in Iraq. And you can tell just with the way she was talking, a lot of pain inside of her, a lot of things that she wants to change, a lot of reality that she's want to change. And I actually found an article where she talked about at the beginning of the war, the main goal of the organization was to provide shelter for women. But then after the prison scandal in Iraq, they decided they should also have a presence in the prisons. And then she also said that 6 out of the women that were imprisoned in Iraq actually spoke about being assaulted, being raped, serially raped by the staff of the police station before they even reached the prison. And so again, there's so many other things away from just the big picture of equality for men and women, because in a way, in a lot of oppressed governments and society, that's almost a luxury. But then you have the basics of respect for human life that does not exist. How do you see a documentary like Shocking and Awful maybe help the reality of things?
Well, I think one thing it does is that it brings some of this reality to the surface. Because what governments do when they wage war, and certainly the United States government has done this in the Iraq war, is they try to sanitize our field of vision so that we don't see what's happening. I mean, for example, there's a ruling that as an executive order against photographers taking pictures and publishing pictures of American caskets coming back from Iraq. They don't want you to see any of the downside of this. And the other thing that I think stands out here is that war is, by definition, incredibly brutal and killing. And in order to wage a war, you have to pump people up, and you have to foster that sense of brutality. And you know, the rates of rape and assault against Iraqi women since the occupation began have skyrocketed. But interestingly, there's a statistic that somewhere close to 25% of American women in the military in Iraq have been raped or assaulted by their fellow soldiers during the war. So it's this whole climate that's created of, whether you want to call it machismo or brutality, but it's that anything goes, and women become the victims of this aggression. And so what we've tried to do with this film, and I just want to mention the 2 women who produced this piece were not able to come tonight. Larilyn Sanchez, who's an editor and a videographer in New York, and Pershang Vaziri, who's an Iranian-American filmmaker who was a producer of this piece, but was also the series producer for Shocking and Awful for the whole 12 programs. What they tried to do through this is to let women speak about what's happening to them and what they want. And I think that's the other thing that happens in war is that the victims are not only physically abused and brutalized, but they're also silenced.
They're scarred.
And you're not supposed to speak, and if you do speak, your voice is not heard. And so that's mainly what we've tried to do with this series, is to let the voices of the Iraqi people be heard inside the country that is destroying their country.
And we're going to also talk about the courageous women that actually spoke out on camera, because not a lot of people would want to do that,
Right.
since they obviously live, and naturally they live in fear. But first we have a phone call. I believe it's from Abdullah in Florida. Hello? Abdullah from Florida. Hello once again. All right, we lost Abdullah from Florida.
Okay, maybe he'll call back.
So go ahead, Brian, about again, how did these women stand up and actually talked?
Well, the two clips that we have left, a couple things happened. One is that inside of Iraq, we had film crews, some from the West and some Iraqis, who went and spoke to women in Iraq, spoke to women on the street and in markets and in their homes. And then they spoke to women like Yanar Mohammed, who are, organizers and politically active. So, that's one way. And early on in the war, in some ways, it was easier because things had not become so totally controlled and repressive as they are now. And it was also possible for reporters to move around in those days, in the early days, because it was so chaotic. Now it's been clamped down, and the U.S. military and the government do not permit independent journalists to move freely throughout the society. And on top of that, it's extremely dangerous because of the ongoing hostilities and the fighting that's going on. So I'm not saying that reporters can't, but it's a lot more dangerous. So it's harder to have people speak. But you'll see some of that in the next clip we show. And in the third clip, it's the story of 6 Iraqi women who are some of the most courageous people I've ever met in my life. They're all professional women, doctors, pharmacists, journalists, engineers, who came to the United States to plead with the American people to put an end to the war. And I think their spirit came from, well, I'll just tell you this story.
Go ahead.
The first day they were here, they had this long flight from Jordan, and they were staying in an apartment on the Upper West Side of New York. And somebody said to them, do you want to go out and see New York? And one of the women said, no, I don't. I did not come here to enjoy myself and to see the beauty of this country. She said, my country was beautiful once also, and you've destroyed it. And so I feel very bad about going out and just, not that I don't appreciate the beauty of this country, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here to speak to the American people about what they're doing to my country. And I just thought it had a simple but powerful message. And I think they're just ordinary women, too. They're not anything special in that sense, but they had the courage to step forward and to speak out. So we can talk about some of that.
They're women with a specific mission.
They were on that trip, yeah. And I also have to give tremendous credit to Code Pink, which is a women's peace organization here in the United States. A lot of the footage that we have from Iraq was filmed by Gail Murphy, who was a co-founder of Code Pink. And they were in Iraq, members of Code Pink, 3 or 4 times before the war began. They demonstrated with Iraqi people against the war before it started, and then after the war they've gone back several times. And Code Pink and a number of other international organizations started an organization inside of Iraq called it was called Occupation Watch. And the idea was that they would report on what was happening during the occupation. And there was tremendous pressure brought to close that down. They had several Iraqi women journalists that were working in the office there in Iraq, and one of them, is you'll see on the clip later, Iman Kamas, who now has been forced into exile.
Wow.
But well, you know, there's out of a population, I think, of 28 million people, 4 million Iraqis are now in exile, 2 million in internal exile, and 2 million mainly in Jordan and Syria. So it's a catastrophe.
It's you know, words cannot even obviously describe the sad feeling that whenever you research or you find out all these different facts about what's happening, if words maybe cannot describe them, maybe the video could. So I'm thinking the best thing for us to do now before we start seeing tears come out is to see the second clip, which is a sneak peek of Shocking and Awful, produced by Deep Dish TV. We'll be right back.
Plan to invade Iraq. It is not acceptable to me that this action be taken in my name or the names of other American women and our families, especially women of color who know what it means for our lives to be considered worthless.
As human beings, we're supposed to treat others as we would want to be treated. Sit down and consider, would you want this to happen to your own children? If you're a mother, if you're a grandmother, if you have, you know, sisters and brothers, would you want your family to be treated like this? And I think that the answer would come very quickly and very clearly that no. The poor children and women in Iraq didn't do anything to the United States to deserve this.
Awaken to your power.
We decided that we did want to work as women, and that Daddy got us into this, and we're going to have to get ourselves out of it.
Awaken to your power.
Well, I think it's a very sort of profound and important way to make a statement that is not just verbal, that speaks to people's souls.
Awaken to your power.
Well, when you ask me, why I think our leaders are taking us to war, it's interesting that I can't immediately come up with a good answer. Anytime that someone says we don't have a choice, I start not to trust them. I am fasting to express my opposition to the U.S. waging war in Iraq. That this opposition spreads across the nation.
When I waked up this morning, I remembered hearing that a rare sight of Venus was to be visible but when I came and looked at the window, I could only see Mars, not Venus. I was disappointed, but when I thought about it, it seemed a little metaphor about how the consciousness of this looming war takes up so much of my attention these days and weighs down my spirit since 9/11. Having a quiet time here to feel connected to other women concerned about peace.
There were those who didn't care about praying, the young ones, the ones who had been to America. They told the old ones, you are wasting your time. Time? The old ones prayed for the young ones. They prayed for Allah to mend their brains. One of the women in the book wrote an alphabet of words, and the last word was zest. And I don't want to forget.
غير عمل صدام بيه. ايه.
Okay.
ايه.
Can she start off by telling me what she thinks of the CPA?
نبدأ بسؤال أنا اشتريت بالسلطة
الائتلاف القوات الامريكيه يعني في العراق؟
والله القوات الامريكيه ما ريتها تبقى هنا. اولا امريكا من جت حررتنا على اساس التحرير، تحرر وترجع، ما ريتها تبقى هنا. ايه هذا نريد امريكا باسرع وقت تطلع من عندنا قبل الاهانه وقبل لا يصير تربيه مو خوش.
Anytime I hear someone tell me I have no choice, I start not to trust them. That was a sentence that, to me, stood out.
Well, we do have choices. And I think that the women in these films prove that even under the most difficult circumstances, we have choices. And I think that the women of Code Pink and the other women that we see in the United States that have rallied to oppose the war and to express solidarity with the women in Iraq, they have choices too. I mean, they could stay home, they could ignore this war, like many have, and they've chosen not to. They've chosen to take the public stage and to say that we have a responsibility here, that our country is destroying another people's lives and another people's country, and we have responsibility for that. And we can't keep our eyes closed. And that's a choice. And they tell us there's nothing you can do about it. You know, now we're supposed to channel all of our energies into trusting that one or another politician once again is going to solve the problem for us. And I think most people know deep down in their hearts that that's not true, that unless we make the choice to do something like these women have done, from Iraq and the American and Canadian women and throughout the world, women who have stood with the Iraqis, you know, it'll just go on and on and on, you know.
We're going to talk further also about democracy and the definition of this new form of democracy, quote-unquote democracy, that's you know, that they're trying to instill in Iraq that you obviously do not see. But I wanted to see if any of you guys had anything to share with us first. You guys okay?
Yeah. I was actually a bit surprised to see this because, you know, on the news we don't really see women in either Iraq or in America having a voice about this. You know, we see what's going on CNN, the shooting, you know, the politics behind it, but we don't really get a personal feel about what's going on with the people. And it's really nice to see a different perspective, as this video, I'm sure, is trying to show us all.
Have you ever heard an American actually say what you just heard on this documentary? On mainstream television, not in person, obviously.
No.
Right? I mean, that's what it is. There's like such a disconnect, such a big disconnect between even people that live here in the United States because of the media. And honestly, every time we have a documentary such as Shocking and Awful that reflects that sort of reality back in the Middle East, we get our audience that tell us the same things. We don't tell them to say that. Every time I ask for a comment or something, I get the same thing, because no, you do not see those. You do not see, let's say, an American say that, do not go to war on my name, because I did not sign up for this.
Right.
Go ahead, Muhammad.
You're right about the American news, though. We don't see it. From every day, my parents, especially my mother, watches the Arabic channels, which would broadcast the news of the Middle East. And every day she gives me her opinion how America does not belong in Iraq. And she watches this like constantly. So I was agreeing with Brian's like perspective upon things. It's true that America doesn't show you anything in our news here. And she feels very strongly about, like, you know, the women, like everything there. Like, America doesn't belong there. They've done what they said they were going to do, and why are they still there?
And unfortunately, even back in the Middle East, they do not see that. They do not see that sense of unity that many people here in the United States feel with them back in the Middle East. They do not see that. They just see the brutality, the negative factors, the negative elements that they get to live every day.
Actually, we see in the TV whatever the government wants us to see. That's it. Like, we not see this kind of show on the TV or something like that. And something feel like sad and sorry about whatever is happening in Iraq, you know. That's it.
And especially its effects on women and children. Obviously, we're not discriminating here, but again, it's more of an, even as we said at the beginning, an unforgotten, a forgotten victim. We have a phone call from Amina in New Jersey. Hello?
Hello?
Hi, Amina. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. Go ahead, Amina.
I would like to comment on what was said before, how we see different things than what America sees as Arabs.
Uh-huh.
I'd just like to say that it makes me really angry how we know exactly what's going on and who is hurt the most. And Americans don't see that. Americans just see the negative side of us. They wonder why we're getting, you know?
That Americans only see the negative sides of the Middle East. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and we're easy and we know what's going on over in the Middle East and how it bothers us how we die and how everyone's hurting back in the Middle East. And the propaganda that is shown, it really makes us really bad.
Amina, how old are you?
Excuse me?
How old are you?
I'm 18.
18? Are you a student?
No.
Do you ever feel that you maybe as a person you want to contribute into doing something positive and helping that disconnect kind of not be there anymore?
Yeah, of course. You know, I try to be involved, and inshallah, when my semester starts in college, I'm gonna, you know, make how to make movements in my community. And we have organizations over here to show about Arab women.
Uh-huh.
So definitely going to be involved because America knows that about everything that is going on. You know, the people that are dying and hurting and everything that is going on, but chooses not to show it. And then people wonder why we have so much anger and aggression as Arabs.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when the discrimination starts.
I mean, obviously, what she's saying is exactly, you know, what she feels, and she wanted to obviously portray that through the screen of Dandana TV. Amina, thank you so much for calling us and for sharing your feelings with us. As I said before, these documentaries kind of make you think, not think because you think about that all the time, feel that you finally see something that you understand and that you've been waiting to watch, because everything else is like, oh, here we go again.
Well, you know, I thought her comment was quite true, really, because one of the things that happens in war and in any kind of situation of exploitation is that you have to dehumanize the people that you're about to go to war against or that you are going to exploit. Mm-hmm. You have to somehow make them out to be less than you are. I mean, this is true throughout human history. You know, if we look at the justification for slavery or the justification for the genocide against the Native American peoples of this country, that they're not really quite human. And so even if you look at how the religion of the people of the Middle East, which is predominantly, though not solely, Islam, is portrayed in the United States, it's constantly demeaned. It's constantly, you know, compared to, you know, the enlightened way of the West, right? And you know, there's many things that could be discussed about that in a different context. But overall, you have this situation of dehumanization that goes on. Now, in any society, including in the United States, that goes on inside of relationships between men and women, and it goes on in the society generally, mm-hmm. where you know, women are dehumanized because of the social relationships that are established. And in a war context, that becomes magnified tremendously. And then the propaganda that has to justify why we have the right to go in and take over somebody else's country and tell them what to do, that you have to demean them and to diminish them in order to justify your actions in doing that. And that's what's going on now. And I think that you know, people from the Middle East, Muslims from all over the world, feel that when they look at what's going on inside the United States right now.
And it's also, I would think, much easier to even dehumanize after launching this whole negative propaganda on, let's say, Islam, or even countries that do have, you know, Christian, other religion populations. They don't say that these religions even exist in the Middle East. And it becomes even easier to dehumanize the women that are veiled in the Middle East because they portray them as you know, women that are totally oppressed. They don't necessarily understand that a lot of these women, it's their choice to be that. It's their choice to be veiled. It's their choice. It's part of their life. The ones that do not want to be veiled, they just don't, if they can, in their country, obviously. But again, that adds another factor to facilitate that whole, you know, dehumanizing factor that's happening.
Well, and it's also that somehow people in the West have the right to, you know, resolve this question for people in other parts of the world, right? Particularly the colonial countries, you know, that we can tell people how they should resolve their internal conflicts. I mean, I'm sure, and I know that there are many battles that go on, you know, within the people of Iraq or within Iran or in any of the countries, including here in the United States, about the role of women and patriarchal society and the role that religion plays in the oppression of women. Those discussions go on all the time, but you don't get to hear those discussions. You know, all you get to hear is that the United States will come in and liberate the women of Iraq or the women of Iran or the women of Iraq, of Afghanistan. And that's pure propaganda. And that's what we were trying to bring out, particularly in this program, but throughout this series.
And now I'm hoping that this last segment that we're going to get to see tonight on Talk It Out from Shocking, it's from Shocking and Awful?
No, this is a separate piece that we did. It's called Iraqi Women Speak Out. And it's a little documentary, half-hour documentary that we did about those 6 Iraqi women who came to the U.S.
Okay.
And we can talk a little bit after the clip.
Absolutely. So we're going to get to see that, and we'll be back with Talk It Out to comment a little bit more on the documentary on Iraqi Women Speak Out.
So here we are at this crossroads in history where our government refuses to listen to us. The Iraqi government put in place by our government refuses to listen to the Iraqi people. And we have a chance this afternoon, a rare opportunity, to listen to some very, very courageous women. And you know, just stepping foot here in the United States is an act of courage in and of itself. And getting these women their visas to come here was a major obstacle because the U.S. doesn't want us to hear their stories. In fact, there are 3 members of the delegation who still haven't been allowed in. One is sitting in Amman, Jordan, waiting to get her visa, and 2 of them have been turned away. And those women are women who lost their entire family members, their husband and their children, by U.S. tanks shooting at them in the middle of the street. And when those women took the dangerous road to go from Baghdad to Amman, Jordan, to go to the U.S. Embassy to solicit a visa so they could come here and tell their stories about how the occupation has affected them, the U.S. government denied their visas. On what grounds? These women no longer have compelling family ties that would ensure that they would go back to Iraq.
We want to talk about the facts on the ground. It is not something from my mind. It is not illusions in my mind. This is the difference between the people living in Iraq and the people living in USA or the American administration. When I'm listening to President Bush when he's talking, or the people who are supporting him, I can say, oh my God, they are still living in their dreams and their illusions. They are talking in something in the dreams, not on the ground. Why don't they listen to the Iraqi people? After 3 years, they don't listen to Iraqi people. They are trying to force the Iraqi people to think the way they want. And this is the wrong way.
Iraq as a country, as a nation, as a state, is destroyed, is totally, even the social texture is dismantled. And I think the American people lost many young men and women, and they paid very huge amounts of money that can be useful in, in creating jobs, in building the country, helping people, helping families. What is the goal? Why so many people are killed? Why so many things are destroyed? Why so much agony to people, to the Iraqis and to the American? Why?
Now, child in Iraq see the horrible from soldier or American soldiers. So what they remember then about what killed mother, his father. Now I see you and see another one. I feel there is something between a human. There is a human thing between us. But now in Iraq we just see the soldier as no human.
As a Kurd, I thought I really need to speak out, because most of the Kurds, they are not speaking out. They're either afraid or they're saying, okay, this is the first time we got a little bit of freedom, let's not ruin it. I'm saying to them, you better speak out, because you're going to be used, and they making the Kurdish people more enemy of the common people. Like my sisters and my family, they are teachers and professionals inside Iraq. Their students are Arabs and every kind, Assyrian. That's the land of civilization. We are all connected. They're trying to divide Iraq into pieces, into ethnicities, into religious bases, to divide them and weaken them. And they can't. I don't want one Iraqi, Arab, whatever, to die in the name of a Kurdish person. I don't want that. That's why I need to speak out. As a Kurd, as a human being, I don't want that to be done in my name.
Brian, just out of curiosity, in the Code Pink conference that they had, was there a lot of mainstream press?
No.
It's very unfortunate.
They were basically ignored by the mainstream media. There was some local coverage as the women spread out and went around the country and spoke. Some local television channels did cover it.
I'm surprised because even, let's say, if you are to send out invitations to the different media outlets in the United States with the big title of, 6 Iraqi women are coming to the United States to talk about their experience during the war. That's first-hand experience. That's women that have lost family members, friends, that have witnessed so many different things, educated women that really want to try to make a difference. You would think that it sounds, in the American way, interesting enough of a story to be covered.
But that's not the story that the government wanted us to hear. I think you said that a few minutes ago.
Absolutely, but that pretty much confirms it.
Yeah, and I said to people for a long time, ask yourself the question: how would the American media's coverage of the war have been different if all of the media in the United States was state-owned? Would it have been any different than it actually was? I don't think so. Now there's some criticism and now there's some questioning because, 6 years on, it's obviously a quagmire that it's going to be difficult, from their perspective to get out of. But of course, I'm just having said that, I'm reminded of a brilliant statement by a Iraqi Palestinian doctor who lives in California, Dalia Wasafi, who said that all this talk of timetables and timelines for getting out, and she said if you walk up and you see a rape going on, do you look at your watch and tell the rapist, I'm going to give you 10 minutes to stop that? No, you try to stop it immediately. And what's going on, I think, and I think there's ample documentation, is the rape of that country and of its people, and sometimes literally and sometimes metaphorically. And what amazed me about these women was, and you raised this before, was the tremendous courage. And they knew that they would face consequences when they went back, and they have.
How so?
Dr. Entisar Rayabi, who you saw speaking about how we have a human connection between all of us, but that in that war, American soldiers are becoming seen by the Iraqi people as not human. And of course, if you look at them, the way they're bulked up with all this equipment and these big goggles and hats and everything, they look like robots. But anyway, she has 5 daughters. She's a full-time pharmacist. She was the head of the pharmacy department at Yarmouk Hospital in Baghdad, one of the larger hospitals in Baghdad. And when she came back from this trip, she was fired. Not only that, right in that same time period, her brother was brutally murdered and his body was dismembered. And she was given death threats and put on a death list and went into hiding with her daughters. And in that period when she was in hiding, her house was burned down and demolished. And and with the help of various people, she was able to get to London, where she's been living in exile. Now, here's a tremendously educated. You can see from this film a poised, courageous, beautiful woman who has so much to contribute to that country, and she's now living, and I wouldn't say hand to mouth, but pretty close in exile, like so many other women throughout the country. Dr. Iman Khamas, who I met in Istanbul, Turkey, when she came to speak at the World Tribunal on Iraq in 2005 that we filmed. She's a proficient journalist, a wonderful public speaker, a tremendously courageous woman. When she got back from this trip, she was put on a death list, and she's now in exile in Europe. One of the women that you didn't see, Dr. Rashid, who's also a pharmacist, she was forced to close her private pharmacy clinic, and she's stayed in Iraq, and she's working to raise funds for widows and orphans, but her business, her life's work has been destroyed. The Kurdish woman that you saw at the end of that clip, Soraya, she's a human rights activist, but she's also a doctor. And she was forced out of Iraq right after the first Gulf War, when the United States, as she mentioned, encouraged the Kurds to rise up against Saddam Hussein and then did nothing to support them. And of course, thousands were slaughtered. And she was forced into exile at that point. I think probably her family sent her out of the country. So these women have paid a tremendous price for the meddling of the West in their country. And if you think about it, women are the backbone of the family and the backbone of the society. And there's tremendous stresses that people carry inside of themselves under normal conditions to try and raise a family and have a career. But in the context of war, it becomes horrendous. And the statistics we're not getting are on heart conditions and strokes and diabetes and other stress-induced diseases that affect women in particular. And there's been a lot of statistics, for example, in New Orleans after the disastrous, malfeasance of the flooding. The health conditions of women have deteriorated tremendously, and there's all kinds of statistical research on that. So, these things have many, many ramifications.
Especially with women in pregnancies.
Exactly.
and the children, if they are born, they're born weak, and then if they are, God forbid, born weak, then they need medication, and the cost of medication, or, the medication is not available or it's not right there. So there's so many different things that go into it, as you said. I had even more questions about the last clips that we saw, especially the one part where the president of Code Pink, said that the two women were not allowed to come to the United States. They were not granted visas because the reason was there was not enough compelling evidence that they would go back to Iraq because all of their family members died in the war, so they do not have family ties that maybe would have them go back to Iraq, which is a little bit, well, not a little bit, but it's pretty disturbing. I wanted to definitely thank you, Brian, for being a part of our show tonight. Thank you so much for sharing this.
I really appreciate it. And
this
thanks
this
to our
great footage
audience
with us,
too.
guys. Any last thing to say tonight?
A lot of
Speechless?
interesting information, videos.
And people can get copies of both of these programs, both the DVDs. The Shocking and Awful is a 3-disc, 12-program set, and you can order them from Deep Dish TV at
deepdishtv.org, which is the website
deepdishtv.org, yeah.
which we've been seeing on our screen
good.
throughout the episode. Brian Drolet, director of Deep Dish TV. Actually, I wanted to kind of tease / introduce a new competition to all young Arab American filmmakers that would like to that have some sort of idea to develop into a documentary about the Middle East or about Arab Americans. We're going to have a great cooperation with Deep Dish TV and Dandana TV for you to send us proposals and idea for a documentary that you have in mind. You can send it to us at talkitout@dandana.tv. We're going to have more rules and more information, so if you can just send us an email and let us know that you're interested, we will definitely email you back with more details, and we'll talk about it more on Talk It Out, hopefully in the next upcoming weeks. For Talk It Out, I'm Zeina Yazbek, sponsored by ArabLounge.com. We will see you next Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time.